Hey guys, this is Adam. I'm doing another video. This one's going to be on the secret space program and the deep state, and kind of just how the secrecy snowballed, how things developed. I'm going to have to give a brief overview of the UFO situation, so I'm going to touch upon a lot of different points very quickly, so just bear with me. So there's still a lot of conjecture about whether or not these beings are angels and demons, or flesh and blood extraterrestrials, or extra dimensionals, or whatever. My guess would be that it's probably all of them. But the point is that they're real, they exist, they're here, they've been here, they've been interacting with humanity for a long time, and so that's the situation. There's another component to this, which is the time travel component, which is really complicated, and I don't want to talk too much about that, but that is probably a big factor in the situation that just gets way too complicated too quickly. I mean, if we're talking about time travel and us from the future and things like that, and I mean, the whole thing just kind of flies off the handle, so I'm going to leave that alone for now. There appears to have been advanced civilization back in history that you could call Atlantis, or whatever you want to call it, but I believe that it was an advanced civilization from the research I've done, and probably had open contact with non-human entities, and for whatever reason that society, that civilization collapsed. There was probably some kind of great flood that happened, and probably the majority of humanity was scattered to different parts of the earth. And more than likely, one particular group of extraterrestrials, or even humans that were in contact with them or something, I think slowly tried to build back their power over time, kind of like in the shadows. The Bible even talks about this. The more you read the Old Testament, or at least for me personally, the more I read the Old Testament, time and time again, it sounds like they're talking about extraterrestrials. I don't see any other way that it's just clear to me that that's what they're talking about, and at least in the Old Testament. And that, so throughout time since the fall of Atlantis, we've been in contact with these beings through secret societies and certain rituals that have been done. And what are they contacting demons? Are they contacting jinn? Are they contacting extraterrestrials? Or, I mean, again, it's really kind of irrelevant at this point. The point is that they have been in contact with us since this time. So that's kind of how things developed, and then eventually we get into World War II, and the the United States government and how it handled the situation. Because I want to paint a picture for you and try to explain a little bit better about how the secrecy kind of compounded on itself and developed into what the situation that we have today. When it was first discovered that there were these beings flying around in our skies and doing whatever it was that they were doing, of course, the natural inclination of the people that were overseeing this situation at the time was to keep it secret, because they weren't sure how the public was going to handle the information. And also the events of the War of the Worlds broadcast that they did, where people lost their minds and some people ended up committing suicide. That was a shock test that they did for the public to see how they would react. Also, I heard that they recovered certain crashed UFOs that contained a number of dismembered human body parts, and they pretty much unanimously decided that the public was not going to be able to handle the UFO situation at that time. And so this, of course, at the time could also be argued that it posed a national security threat because we don't know what these beings are, what their intentions are, and we don't know the level of their technology. So a concerted effort was made to gather as much technology as we could to at least rival their technology until we could kind of figure out what the situation is. Now, that being said, the secrecy started off right away with a small handful of people that were chosen to oversee a lot of this information. The development of World War II and the Nazis. The Nazis were clearly in contact with some kind of extraterrestrial force. The Nazis, the Nazi doctrine, UFOs and extraterrestrials are intrinsic to the Nazi doctrine. So, if you have studied the Nazis, then you must have come across this. They wholeheartedly believed in extraterrestrials and based a lot of their philosophies on it. So they were more than likely in contact with certain extraterrestrial groups, and they more than likely were building bases in Antarctica, possibly the moon as well. And when the wars started to wind down, they didn't care about losing anymore because they already had well-established bases elsewhere. And of course, with Project Paperclip and them infiltrating the United States government, there wasn't much of a issue to begin with. So the Nazis just kind of went underground. I wouldn't say that they lost the war, but they survived, that's for sure. And then that's when the National Security Act was created and signed by Harry Truman. And that kind of set us off on a path of secrecy that has been compounding on itself up until today. With the development of the Central Intelligence Agency, and then later the National Security Agency. I heard that the National Security Agency was actually set up to keep tabs on the CIA because the CIA was getting out of control. Now, what do I mean by out of control? Well, you have to imagine the situation, because if you're tasked with gathering all this information about UFOs and keeping it secret at all costs, that presents a very tough situation, because you're gathering this technology and you're using this technology and you're advancing this technology, and these technologies obviously could be used for a lot of different things, but the public, of course, never hears anything about it. So you're going to have to find a way to pay for all this too, because all this technology that's being created off the books, you're going to have to find a way to pay for it off the books. Some of it, of course, you can pay for with certain contracts that the military has with companies like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Boeing, Northrop Grumman, all the major aerospace companies, even Bechtel and Halliburton, construction companies like that. You can use those funds to feed a lot of the black projects, but eventually you're going to have to find a way to pay for that where it's completely off the books. And so this is how normal, everyday, well-meaning citizens that are tasked with such a monumental task as collecting and developing UFO technology and keeping it secret from the public could then get into something like drug running. They have to find a way to fund this. They have to find a way to fund these black technologies. And so drug running is one way that they can make a lot of money, especially if they're controlling the international drug trade and it's all off the books. So that's one way. The other way is, of course, siphoning money from already established government programs, and there's great talks you can watch about how they do this. Catherine Austin Fitts has wonderful presentations talking about this. And so these, of course, all these projects to kind of go hand in hand. So the UFO projects, the back engineering projects, and something like super soldier programs, they all blend with each other. You find a crashed UFO, you back engineer the technology that you get from it, and you find some things that could be applicable to other programs, such as super soldier programs, MK Ultra mind control programs, all that kind of stuff. Now the thing about the mind control programs, this has been going on for a long time, probably since even before World War II, at least in this country. The thing is that they discovered when exploring mind control, and this is a lot of this work has to do with Stanford Research Institute, Tavistock, the work of Sigmund Freud, also the work of Dr. Joseph Mengele. And what they discovered was that trauma is one of the best ways to create mind-controlled victims. Trauma at a young age, specifically sexual trauma and violence, things like that. So, therefore, the intelligence communities found that it was advantageous to actually pair up with satanic pedophile groups that were doing satanic pedophile child sex trafficking, because it helped tie into their super soldier programs. And however much they may hate these individuals that they're working with, there is a camaraderie there based on mutual interest. So, now you have people, men and women that need to make very big, serious decisions involving, UFOs and secrets and things like this. And even though that they're doing this out of the goodness of their heart and really believing that they're helping by keeping this information secret from the public, they're now involved with things like drug running and satanic pedophile networks, just by virtue of how the secrecy gets compounded. And of course, other issues get involved too, because now there's a lot of infighting going on with all this need to know information. So if a UFO comes down and crashes, and then let's say the Navy gets there, and the CIA eventually gets there. Okay, so they recover the craft, and then the craft gets put into the hands of the CIA. Right now, the CIA is analyzing it, and the Navy wants to know what information they've recovered from back engineering this technology. Well, then the CIA says that's need to know. We can't tell you that, even though they may have worked together on recovering this particular technology. So now the Navy is indignant about the situation, and so what do? They create their own task force, naval intelligence, whatever you want to call it, where they start collecting their own UFO data, and so that they can compete with everyone else who's keeping their technology secret, and so the whole thing just becomes a giant clusterfuck. It's so compartmentalized that you will have, individuals working in the same building for two different, organizations that are right next to each other in the same building, two different rooms right next to each other in the same building, where in one room they're working on one project, and in another room they're working on the exact same project that could be costing them millions of dollars, and they have no knowledge that the other two even exist. That the other one, the right next door, they're working on the same project. That's how compartmentalized it's become. So the whole thing is completely flying off the, off the handles. So now that the secrecy has dug itself so deep, even if well-meaning people in these intelligence communities wanted this information out, where do you start? How do you tell the public that you've had free energy technologies for a century? The gap has grown so far between everyday public and the breakaway civilization that nobody can figure out how to bridge that gap anymore. So that's the situation we're in now, and that's how the situation is compounded on itself. And something has to happen, because the amount of money and resources that are going into these projects that people have no knowledge of is insane. It's crazy. But this is also something that people should be thinking about, because, if you talk to people, everyone knows that the military has technology that's way more advanced than what they're letting the public know. But I don't think people realize how advanced it is. And that's a big factor, because now we have to contend with humans that have now gained technology that's on par or nearly indistinguishable from extraterrestrial technologies that also have their own agendas and also have their own opinions about how they should control humanity. So that's basically, in a nutshell, a very crude way to explain the deep state and the secret space program and how these black projects have developed and gotten out of hand. So, I don't have any answers. How do you bridge that gap? I don't know. I have no idea. But thanks for listening.